solution, the USFG should adopt a preferential voting system for presidential elections. We believe that today's weighing mechanism should be a net benefit, specifically focused on marginalized groups, because marginalized groups are often forgotten about in traditional politics, and often debate space is a unique space in which we can not forget about them and actually discuss the harms they face. The background is going to be that the U.S. is the old one uses a first past then post system, whereas Australia uses a preferential voting system. And what a preferential voting system does is it says on a presidential election ballot you can vote for your number 1, your number 2, your number 3, and so on. And if your number 1 isn't in the majority or the top X contenders, it's removed, and your number 2 vote is then preferred. It's like what the Oscars do. So we think that essentially it's worked in Australia, and that is the solvency, which is why the plan of today's debate is that the U.S. Federal Congress actually adopts the Australian model for presidential elections through normal means, and will happen as soon as possible, which is the next election. Yes?
Can you just repeat that?
The USFG adopts Australian model of preferential voting through normal means as soon as possible. Now, the first advantage is going to be that of Trump. We see that right now Trump has a strong support from his party. 75% of Republicans and Republican-leaning independents would vote for Trump in 2020, which means it's a question of independents in swing states, specifically Florida and Nevada. We see that independents often vote for third-party members. We see that 5 million independents actually voted for third-party candidates in the 2016 election, and most of them were actually taken in these swing states like Florida, like Pennsylvania, which means that there is a very high chance that Trump is going to be reelected, because if he still has a strong support base, even if Democrats hate him, it's always just going to be a question of independence on those specific swing states. We see that only passing this plan will allow for Trump not to be reelected. We see that Trump loses his election because we see that people can now vote for their second and third candidate, and often those independents would vote liberal leaning. They would vote for Hillary Clinton if they're supporting the Green Party. And specifically, we see that 3 million of them would actually have voted for Hillary Clinton as their second choice. And we see that actually analysis by Politico shows that if the preferential voting system actually existed in the 2016 election, Clinton would have won. That means that Trump would have lost the election. The impacts are climate change. Climate change is going to be the most important impact nowadays because it's an extinction scenario. We are on a brink. If we increase the temperature by 2 degrees, it's going to be really harmful. And the United States right now has stepped out of the Paris climate deal because of Trump, and the EPA is also run by someone who's anti-climate change, which means that only Trump removing from office is going to be key. But secondly, he's decreasing the amount of funding that goes into social security programs. He's also decreasing the amount of funding that goes into welfare programs, which is specifically harmful to those marginalized groups who rely on those. Third and finally, he's actually inflammatory, and we see that a George Washington study shows that every time there's a small economic downturn in the United States, he causes a bomb to drop in the Middle East, which is going to be really key because he's also inflamed North Korea and he's inflaming Iran right now, which means there's a high chance of nuclear war. Next, the second advantage is going to be that of party politics. The first scenario is the two-party system. We see that currently in the United States, the political system is made up for two parties because it has used a winner-take-all method. We see that Diverger's law states that third parties can't compete because there's no prize winning less than 50% of the vote. There's no reason for third parties to compete because they never can get that 50% of the vote. But when there's a choice between two candidates from the same party, the party would always lose the election since votes are split between the two candidates. In the last election, Johnson and Stein took 5% of the votes in Michigan, demonstrating how dissatisfied with both candidates voters were. But these votes were meaningless. 5 voters say that these votes were Trump simply because they didn't like the other candidate. It shows a lack of options. We also see that a Pew study found that over the last 30 years, the nation has become more partisan, and Congress has become more ineffective, leading to gridlock. There are 7. We see that there's decreased voter turnout. There's 60%. What does it say?
Lack of political engagement creates apathy.
Wait, what is that?
Oh, at 60%.
Oh, voter turnout is 60%. In 2016, the two-party system creates apathy and a lack of political engagement because people don't think they can actually change anything. The links are going to be that the third party actually makes it. The preferential voting system makes it so that third parties candidates can actually win elections. We see that more right now, only candidates who win 5% of votes can actually engage in debates, which means it's key for this preferential voting system to come about, because when people can actually engage in debates, they'll be able to actually have more media coverage and more people will hear about them. But the Federal Election Commission only gives funding to candidates who get a specific amount of the vote, which means that these candidates can get more funding. Third-party candidates can get more funding specifically because they're now getting a greater portion of the vote. Also, we see that it's a possibility for third-party candidates to win, because if there's a second or third choice on the ballot and the first choice doesn't get the main majority, or that means that the third-party candidate can also win. It's also a spillover. A George Washington study found that the president is key to fundraising efforts for Congress members, which means that if the president is from a third party, there's a high chance that there's going to be Congress members from third party because president gets the most media coverage. The impacts are first to increase voter turnout because we see that there's a lack of political apathy because people think that they can actually change the election and vote for third party, which is going to be key. Voter turnout is key to democracy because we have more diversity of opinions. But secondly, there's more diversity. Policies that represent constitutes help the most people. We see that if there's right now, it's party politics instead of issue-drawn politics because people are always just voting on their party line. But if you vote for the preferential system, people can now vote for the issues they care most about and actually defend the issues they care most about, which is key to protecting all interests. But we also see an increase in political engagement on the local level, which is key to checking back for Trump. But moreover, we see that there's more Congress. Okay. The second scenario is going to be that of partisan antagonism. Right now, U.S. party antagonism is at an all-time high. Pew finds that there is a 36-point graph increasing in independence, but moreover, we see that for the first time in history, Republicans and Democrats as a majority view each other as unfavorable. Third, we see that Democrats actually, the reason for this is that Democrats have moved, media perception has actually slandered, each opposing party. We see that, because people are just so angry at the other party, specifically because of the presidential election, media just continues to make the other party seem worse and worse. The links are, we see that in Australia, when you are able to actually vote for multitudes of parties rather than just one, you actually have more of an empathy towards that party, and you're less likely to slander that other party because you're still voting for them on the ballot. Moreover, we see that specifically independents are key to stopping this partisan divide because independents are the moderates or the middle ground that create policies, which means that if independents are able to vote either side because they often want to choose either side because they can vote for multiple party candidates, that means there's less partisan politics. Also, it's issue focused now because people don't have to vote on party lines because they know that their one issue that they care about can only be supported by one party. Now that they can vote for different candidates, they can vote for different issues and vote for this candidate that's more specifically representing them, which decreases partisanship because if you're issue focused, it's better to be angry over someone for an issue rather than be angry over someone because they're just Republican or Democrat. Also, there's a less probability of slander because a UMich study finds that if you're supporting a candidate, you're less likely to be mad at that candidate, which decreases the partisan divide. The impacts are, first, we see that if you have less partisan divide, there's less gridlock, and gridlock is key to solving back. We see that a political article literally said gridlock is killing people in the status quo because we see that policies aren't being passed on things like gun control and climate change, and that's going to be key to solving back for that because if we have more diversity in opinion and more issue-focused politics, we'll always have more policies passed. But secondly, it's key to local activism. We see that a lot of people aren't active. A lot of people aren't compromising on the local level right now, but that's going to be key to checking back for sanctuary cities. It's key for checking back for climate change. And the only way we get local activism and people talking to one another is if there isn't this partisan politics, and only the affirmation is providing for that.
So order is going to be just some stuff on the background on the top of the case, then DACP, then advantages in order. Is everybody ready? Let's start time now. Let's go to the second point of background and talk about how Australia uses a preferential voting system. I want to clarify the kind of preferential voting system that Australia uses because there are a lot in the status quo. The kind of preferential voting system that Australia uses is called instant runoff voting. That's this ranking system that they talk about. So now that's cleared up, let's go to the first disadvantage, which is that of instant runoff inefficiency. The uniquest one is that a study by Columbia mathematics and computer science professor Stephen H. Unger says that a study found that IRB is literally the least quality preferential voting system. Subpoint A to this is that IRB is functionally useless beyond 3 candidates. The reason for this is that Stephen H. Unger, in a 30-page proof, demonstrates that a candidate can be defeated when it literally would have won in a 2-person election against all other candidates in the instant runoff ranking. Right? This is only exclusive to instant runoff systems because it is the only system among preferential voting systems that actually ranks 1 through 10, in which there's no actual difference and no actual room for error and things like that. So point B into this is the spoiler dilemma. The spoiler dilemma is basically when people downgrade their favorite candidate in instant runoff voting elections to prevent what they consider the worst candidate from actually winning. According to Stephen H. Unger, in this exact study, it's literally the spoiler dilemma skews 25 to 30% of elections with IRB. So the unique to subpoint 2 is that of Arrow's theory of impossibility. So Arrow's theory of impossibility is basically this giant mathematical proof done by, it's proof by contradiction, but it's giant mathematical proof done by this guy named Arrow, right? And it basically assesses that all preferential voting systems have different degrees of error, right? And it found basically that range voting has the least amount of error, instant runoff voting has the most amount of error. The 2 reasons as to why instant runoff voting has the most amount of error is first the spoiler dilemma, and second the defeated candidate dilemma, which is basically the first subpoint that I talk about in the study by Stephen H. Unger. Yeah.
Wait, can you just summarize in one sentence each the spoiler dilemma and then the defeated candidate dilemma?
Okay, basically with instant runoff voting, when there are more than 3 candidates, a candidate can be defeated when they would have won against all other candidates in a 2-person election. The spoiler dilemma is when people downgrade their favorite candidate to prevent what they consider the worst candidate from winning, which according to Stephen H. Unger, a professor of computer science and mathematics at Columbia University, skews 25 to 30% of instant runoff voting. The link here is that the plan passes and they implement instant runoff voting, and we see the skew of 25 to 30% of elections applied to U.S. elections. It's probably not the case with Electoral College, considering the fact that like only 2 out of all Electoral College elections have actually resulted in like people not winning the popular vote and actually winning the Electoral College elections. So we literally see like less actual skewing in elections in the status quo than we do in the aft world. Okay, there's probably going to be 2 major internal links here. The first internal link is that of like decreased democracy. If you're going to see like candidates being elected that aren't representing people, they're probably going to be implementing policy that doesn't represent their constituents, which is probably going to be really bad because as they like bring up in the way mechanism, we talk about net benefits to like minority groups and marginalized people. Like this is probably going to be very, very bad about like a moment in which like you have candidates who are not representing marginalized people because their like elections are skewed and they're not actually being represented, and that's probably going to lead to a bunch of things like systemic violence and stuff like that. Second, like internal link is that of like decreased trust in government. At the moment, it's probably going to come out like that this is a bad voting system, considering that literally Columbia computer science and mathematics professors have found this, and Arrow's theory of possibility literally ranks this as the worst one. It's probably going to come out in like newspapers that like the U.S. federal government just implemented a really bad voting system, which is probably going to decrease trust in government and trust in government's ability to represent the people, which is probably going to then in turn decrease the voter turnout, probably then in turn decrease democracy, probably decrease the like scale at which minorities are advocating for themselves politically, which is probably going to increase the amount of systemic violence towards them because candidates aren't represented. Something to thank you at this time. On to the counterplan. The counterplan is the United States federal government will implement a range voting system for presidential elections with a ranking system of 1 through 99. The United States federal government will implement a range voting system for presidential elections with ranks 1 through 99. You got it?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, on to the solvency. Solvency point 1 is, according to a study by UCLA professor Terrence Tao of mathematics, the range voting system is irrespective of the number of transits, which is just another word for options, scores consistently the highest efficiency rating when applied to Arrow's theory of impossibility. Second, according to a Reuters studies of range voting, the Republic of Venice, which used literally range voting for 500 years, had consistently higher democratic outcomes than all other countries in the time period. Second of all, I'm pretty sure states Tamil Nadu and Rajasthan in India implemented range voting systems and they saw significantly higher democratic outcomes. 3, Stephen H. Unger says the spoiler dilemma doesn't exist with range voting system because there is no like incentive for you to not vote for your favorite candidate. That incentive exists at the moment in which you create rank voting systems. Like a range voting system just means you apply a number value to all candidates that are running. That's how that works. So there's no incentive to rank like the candidate, like there's no incentive to downgrade the rank of the person who you like if you don't want the person who you least like to win. Yes.
So does that mean that people are going to have to write like 1 through 99 every time they vote for anything? Because they have to go through 99 options?
No. You write like 99 or like 87 or like 76 or like 50 on the candidate, right? You don't rank them 1 through 99. You write the number value 1 through 99 on the candidate. This is much better than instant runoff voting, which is what Australia does, because there's like a ton of less dilemmas that come with rankings. Okay, on to the aft case. Anything else? Okay, on to the aft case. They talk about Trump. Okay, first cross-apply all the analysis. Cross-apply the UCLA study, which probably indicates that there's an increased propensity at which Trump is going to be elected because of skewed elections. Cross-apply the Reuters study that says, oh, actually not the Reuters study. So cross-apply the Columbia study that says there's increased skewing from 25 to 30%, which probably indicates that even if you implement instant runoff voting, there's still like, and you have all this uniqueness in link analysis to like suggest that Trump is going to like not win as a result of it. There's still the potential that like the election is skewed. That's the problem with instant runoff voting. You can absolutely never guarantee the results of an election. We're probably going to see that range voting solves for a lot better at the moment. There are probably 3 key examples, right? We see like the Republic of Venice, right? This is for 500 years it had range voting, right? And it was by far the most democratic like city-state in all of Europe, Judge. Second of all, we see like in Tamil Nadu and Rajasthan, like this really did work. We saw highly more democratic elections. Oh, by the way, this is according to the BBC. I forgot to say that. And then basically they say that like Trump is going to lose the election. Like that would probably be guaranteed if there were 3 candidates maximum running for president in the next like election. And this is according to Arrow's theory of impossibility, right? If there are more than 3 candidates running for the election, there is absolutely no guarantee in an instant runoff voting system that Trump is not going to be elected, which is probably a reason to vote down the affirmative at the moment in which like pretty much all mathematical and scientific analysis indicates that range voting is better. We're not saying it's perfect because no voting system is perfect according to Arrow's theory of impossibility. It's just consistently demonstrated that range voting produces less skewed outcomes. No thank you, not at this time. Their second argument is that of a 2-party system, right? You probably don't solve 8 considering that the 2-party system is probably entrenched in America. There's probably terminal no solvency here at the moment which like independent parties have vastly lower resources than like 2-party like like actual two parties. Like the fact that they're even claiming to solve for this is absolutely not true. Second of all, Australia functionally has a two-party system. Like the two main parties are like very like similar to the U.S. in their like political aligning. There's a Liberal Party that generally supports like environmental policy, like national healthcare systems, and they're generally more powerful than the Conservative Party, which is like very similar to America's like Conservative Party, except like regarding foreign politics. Like Australia is much more isolationist than America. But like there are generally two like main parties in Australia, and functionally, there are very little independents entering in Congress. They don't bring up any uniqueness to suggest this. Furthermore, the range voting system is probably going to solve that at the moment in which it has and produces less skewed outcomes. Third, they talk about partisan antagonism. Partisan antagonism is probably going to increase because people are probably going to get mad at the U.S. federal government and mad at like current like officials because they're literally implementing a bad voting system. Like, you don't change partisan antagonism. You just like make like Democrats and Republicans who exist now mad at the government for implementing a voting system that skews. Furthermore, there's absolutely no guarantee you solve. Range voting solves better, it consistently solves better. There are historical examples and scientific and mathematical examples to demonstrate that. Thank you.
I will start on the counter plan. Then I'll go down the DA and then the outputs in order.
You don't want that on tape.
No. Okay. Is everyone ready?
Yeah.
Okay. My time starts now. First, on the counterplane, you're not going to be buying the counterplane because first, it's functionally the same thing as the affirmative at the point where they don't give you any articulated analysis of how it's different. It's basically just going to lead to the same result. The example they gave of Russia specifically, they say that Russia had, Pakistan. Rajasthan is one of the most democratic countries, but we see that has lots of instances of corruption, and this actually isn't democratic at all. Next, let's go on to the point of the spoiler's dilemma. This logically doesn't make sense. So right now, there is the spoiler's dilemma, because let's say that people have the option between Trump and Hillary, and they decide they don't like Hillary, so they vote for Trump instead. But they would have actually ranked a more liberal person higher under our system, which means that that person would have got voted for instead of Trump. But we see that the range voting system is also going to be worse because it leads to subjectivity. Let's think of it this way. Let's say you're asked to give a grade to every single person on like the ballot themselves. So say I gave like a 99 to Hillary Clinton and like a 95 to Trump. But the thing is that everyone has a different idea in their heads of what between 1 and 99 they should be giving these people, which means that there's never going to be any way to solve for this. Like, this is just going to be super subjective because if every single voter has to give each candidate like a grade, basically, that just means that there's never any way to compare these grades. And in addition, this actually leads to a disadvantage because it makes it more confusing for people. Like, at the point where there are a lot of people who don't have access to voting in elections already, if it's already super confusing for them and they don't even understand how this range voting system works, that's going to decrease voter turnout even more because people are going to be confused. In addition, like a warrant for this is speaker points. Like, if you look to speaker points, there's like a huge range of whether someone decides whether a 28 is a good speech or whether a 26 is a good speech, which means that like we're never going to be able to tell which candidate is actually the best. And the next issue that comes up here is like, what if people tie? Because when you have this range voting system, it could just lead to ties, and they don't have any way to resolve for this. In addition, we see that people won't know how to, like, not only will people not know how the range voting system works, they could accidentally use it wrong. It makes a lot more logical sense to just rank your candidates 1, 2, 3. But if you have to give a number between 1 and 99, maybe they'll accidentally give one person a higher number when they meant to give another person that higher number. So, like, overall, this system is all about important. Next, let's go on to the disadvantage. They talk about how their system gives no room for error, but they don't logically explain how this makes sense. In parliamentary debate, obviously there are like infinite sources that we could use, but we only get 20 minutes of prep, which means that they can't logically explain why their counterplan is better. That means that you're going to be preferring my logical analysis of how this is just going to be more confusing for people, and is ultimately going to be worse. They say that people will downgrade people in our system to prevent the worst candidate from winning, but this logically doesn't make sense. People will give 1 to the candidate they want the most, and 2 to the one that they want the second most, and then they can rank the person they want the least last. Like, that logically makes sense, and that doesn't lead to any error. And in addition, they don't give any impact to what happens if there is error. Like, they say that this leads to, like, the wrong outcome, but we see that, like, also, they would downgrade in range too, so I don't see how they solve for their own errors here. In addition, so basically, the spoiler's dilemma is what's the problem that's happening in the United States right now, and only the affirmative is able to solve for this in a way that isn't confusing. Next, they say that this is going to decrease democracy because people won't be represented, but we say that our system is the best for actually representing people because it means that these moderates that people actually want are represented for. Like, you can cross-apply Javin's point about how, like, in the last election, 5% of people voted independent, even though they knew that that vote wouldn't mean anything just because they didn't like any of their options. That means that they could actually rank to vote for someone who is independent, and that person could have a likelihood of winning. In addition, you can look to Australia, like, in every single instance in Australia, people who won the majority of the vote were the people who were preferentially treated through our ranking system, which shows that our ranking system actually works. Next, they say that voter turnout decreases, but we say that our analysis for how voter turnout increases is going to be outweighing theirs because if people actually believe that their vote has an impact, that's what's going to increase voter turnout. In the world of the counterclaim, people are just confused and they don't know how this new voting system works. Also, we see that right now elections favor the rich, which means that if they do say that this is going to skew the vote somehow, we'd say that means that skewing the vote towards people who are poor or who are minorities, so skewing the vote may actually be a good thing. Next, let's go on to the affirmative case. Basically, over here, you're going to be preparing our specific analysis of how the United States political system works over this random study that they don't even explain. Like, at the point where the ranking system is basically the same as a preferential system, and they have the exact same disadvantage, we say that the ranking system logically makes more sense, which is why you're going to be voting affirmative. So, first, their argument here is that the election is going to be skewed. Again, I say this is a good thing because it skews it towards people who aren't rich. In addition, you can basically extend our entire affirmative case because they don't respond to it. Yeah.
How do you know it skews towards someone rich? Or
because if the status quo is being skewed towards the rich right now, if people who are elected are rich, then we can only assume.
Yeah, we can only assume that if people who are being elected right now are rich, it would be skewed towards people who are minorities or who don't have any money. Right, so you can extend pretty much our entire advantage because they don't respond to it. We see that our system specifically allows for Trump to lose. You can look to our independence in Florida analysis and extend this. We see that these swing states are actually key, and if we have this ranked voting system, that means that independents would rank Democrats above Trump, which means that they would get voted for instead of Trump. Because the issue that we have right now is there's party splintering. The Democrats can only have one candidate because if Democrats are split between two candidates, that means that they're never going to get the majority of the vote. But with the ranking system, that means that people can rank it, and that means that a Democrat would inevitably end up in office. And you can extend all of our scenarios. You see that in the world of Trump, it's more likely that Trump won't be reelected under the affirmative because it's less confusing for people than their weird counterplan. So that means that we're the ones who are solving best for global warming, social security, and so forth. Next, on to the point about party politics. They say that Australia has a two-party system. This is just completely false. Australia has over 3 parties right now. They also talk about how there are no independents in Congress, but they misunderstand our argument. Our argument is that there will be more independents in Congress as a result of our plan passing, and that's because when you have more independents represented, in the presidential election, a study shows that this spillover leads to fundraising in Congress as well. So basically, you can extend all of our analysis about party politics. If people are just ranked have a range voting system in their world, that's not going to be solving for party politics as well because people won't know how to put a score onto each of the third party competitors, whereas in this world we give the voters more options in the most clear sense. Yeah.
Also, when we say the counterplan and the planner fuck are the same, that advocates a perm tax.
Right. Also, that's a perm tax. Basically, if you think that the counterplan and the planner are basically the same thing, that means if you buy that the counterplan is a good idea, you should vote ACT instead because it's basically essentially the same thing.
And the reason it's the same is because you're still ranking people.
Because you're
through,
still
the
ranking
range
people.
system. It's 1, 2, 99. You're still ranking people.
Yeah. Okay. Next, let's go on to the. You're still ranking people 1 through 99. It doesn't make a difference. Onto the party antagonism thing. They don't respond to this at all, which means you can extend the entirety of it. If people are ranking people, that probably makes putting a grade on them, basically, that probably makes them view them more unfavorably if they have to give them a really low ranking. So that means that if they're just putting them in order instead, that means that they probably won't have a negative of a perception of them overall. So that means that this is overall going to lead to more empathy and decrease the amount of gridlock because people will be more willing to cooperate with each other. And for all these reasons, I strongly agree.
over the CP, the response to the CP, the perm, solvency, DA advantages. Is everyone ready? In order. Okay. So that, let's start the time now. So immediately they're really not understanding what our CP is, and they're not at all functionally the same. And so I'm just going to explain how they're not functionally the same. The reason our CP is uniquely better is because you can actually have massive discrepancies between specific candidates if you really don't like someone. So let's say you really hate Donald Trump, and you think that Hillary Clinton is the best candidate ever, and maybe you think Bernie Sanders is the second best candidate. The discrepancy between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders could be like 3 points in the 99 system. Whereas the discrepancy between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump could be literally 80 points, right? It actually gives you the freedom to show how much you don't like candidates and how much you do like candidates. It's not like we have to have a 99 candidates, we label each one a different rank. That's obviously not true. If you have 3, 4, 5 candidates, you can show massive discrepancies between them, and that is how it is different, and that is how it is uniquely better. So what you're seeing is they aren't the same, because you aren't ranking people, you are ranking people, but you have discrepancies between those ranks depending on how much you have emphasis behind one rank or another. And so they aren't functionally the same, so the perm does not apply because they are actually different, because you can show how much you don't like or how much you do like a candidate based on the ratio and based on the discrepancy between the number that you're actually giving them. Okay, and then they just drop basically all of our solvency, right? They drop the Terence-Toe example, they drop the Terence-Toe UCLA study, they drop the Republic of Venice that literally stood for 500 years using this system, and it was the most democratic system in all of Europe at its time. They drop the Tamalandu example, and they only actually respond to the Rajasthan example, and they basically say, first, they don't even know what Rajasthan is. They obviously just got up here and said 3 different states before they actually settled on Rajasthan as the one they were responding to. So obviously they don't know what the exact, specific environmental and the specific corruption behind Rajasthan is, right? They got up here and said Pakistan first, and so obviously you're not going to be buying this response because they obviously don't know what that is, and so you're really not buying the corruption response. But even if you buy the corruption response, just the rest of the solvency outweighs it completely. They also completely drop the analysis that spoiler, that doesn't work, or the spoiler doesn't work within our specific advocacy, doesn't work with range voting, and so they just drop solvency after solvency after solvency, and really they're losing just because of that. And so, they're dropping UCLA study, Republic of Venice, Tamalandu, they don't know what Rajasthan is, and they're dropping the spoiler analysis. Great. And it's great. So let's jump into the first disad, which is out of instant runoff inefficiency. And they just drop a lot here, and it's really problematic. So they completely drop a lot of the studies, and let's just look to what they specifically start to say. They say that we can't logically explain why the CP is better. Okay, here's the logical explanation for why the CP is better that they obviously missed. Because you can have big discrepancies between who you want to vote for. You can actually show your distaste with candidates by giving them disproportionately low votes. You don't have to give the same. You don't have to say that you dislike the difference between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, the same that you dislike the difference between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. You can have these massive differences between them, which is actually more democratic because it gives you more freedom to actually have those differences and show that ratio. Next, they have one actual response to this, which is that of subjectivity, and each voter might have a different standard, and they bring up as a warrant for the speaker points in parliamentary debate. A couple of problems with this. The first of which is when you look historically just at the Republic of Venice, there was a relative societal standard as to what people voted for, a lot better than the speaker points for parliamentary debate. But let's say that that isn't true, and let's just say that there is a lot of subjectivity. What you still see is you see that people tend to vote based on ratios of how much they don't like candidates. So even if the magnitude may not necessarily be the exact same, you're still seeing the ratio occurring, and you're still seeing these discrepancies occurring to similar degrees between them. And so the discrepancy, again, if I'm just going to bring up this Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump example, let's say the discrepancy between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders is let's say 1 point. The discrepancy between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump tends to be around 3 or 4 times as long, and that just depends on what their magnitude is. The discrepancy, the ratio is always the same. And so really what you're seeing is even if there's subjectivity between the magnitude, you don't see that same subjectivity between the ratio. And even historically, you still don't see that same subjectivity between the magnitude. So they're really dropping the solvency here, which is really immediately losing them this argument. And next they talk about how this is really confusing. This isn't at all confusing. I don't know what's so confusing about going into a ballot box, I'll take it at the end of time, and writing a number between 1 and 99 next to the candidate based on how much you like them. It's not a confusing system at all. I think everyone in this room can go into a ballot box and say, hey, I really like this candidate, I'm going to give them a 90. Hey, I really don't like this candidate, I'm going to give them a 2. This is not a complex system at all, and so it's not going to be confusing at all. Next, they try and respond to our links here by saying that, first they say skewing, we also give analysis as to how there's going to be huge skews that are unprecedented, even with the Electoral College system. I'll take it at the end if I have time. And they talk about how skewing may be good. Okay, the problem is skewing may be good, but it may also be bad. And so we want to try and avoid skewing whenever possible, right? It's not that you're always going to have skewing in favor of minorities. You're also going to have skewing in favor of rich people as well. And that's part of the problem. If they can see that they're skewing in favor of rich people now, why can't there also be skewing in favor of rich people in the future? Like, this is a very simple logical argument. You want to avoid skewing as much as possible to have the most democratic process possible, because what you're going to have with democratic processes is, one, you're going to have more confidence within your government, so you're just going to see more people going out to vote, and better representative policy for everyone in society. And so you're not going to have these small special interest groups that could be either on the good side or the bad side that are going to get disproportional amounts of policy. And so quite simply, skewing is always bad, or it can be bad, and so we should try and avoid the possibility for skewing in general, which is why you want to use our range voting system instead of their ranked voting system. And like, they just drop so many warrants here as to why this happens. They drop Stephen H. Unger, they drop UCLA studies, they drop specific analysis in the spoiler dilemma, they drop Arrow's theory of impossibility. They really drop so many warrants here that you're going to be buying this argument that skews happen less in ours than theirs. Their final argument for this is that they're going to outweigh like the increase in support. Like, this is just absolutely not true. Our system is obviously better, and it just has the warrants to prove so, and the solvency to prove so, and they really don't have anything specific. Let's get to their case. So we respond to their first contention by first talking about the UCLA study. We talk about skewed elections specifically from this UCLA study, how the UCLA study says 25 to 30% more skew happens under their ranked voting system. And based on that, you could still have Trump be elected, you may not have Trump be elected, and that's in any more than like 3 candidates running in the race. And so we talk about how if there are only 3 candidates, sure, maybe Trump won't be elected. In fact, he almost certainly won't. But if there are more than 3 candidates under their system, it could go either way. It could go very easily either way. Now, their really response is that we don't explain this. Okay, this is very simple logic. It's like, if you have multiple candidates, what you could have is you could have the ranking system downgrade specific candidates that may be more bipartisan. Right? Let's say we have 20 candidates, and the middle of the road candidates are in that middle 10. You could still have the number 1 candidate from each specific side winning out over those specific candidates in the middle, just because the lower ranking systems don't necessarily get them elected. And so what you're seeing is they really don't have any response to this other than they don't understand it, and they have no wars to combat our UCLA study or the Columbia study, for that matter. We also bring up the idea of the Republic of Venice. They just talk about how the CP is very confusing for voters. Like, the CP is not confusing for voters. It's not a hard CP. You go into a ballot box and you write a number next to a name based on how much you like them. That is not a hard CP. That is not going to be hard for voters. They can go out there and just as easily do that as they could punch a hole in the ballot box to see who they want, or at the number 1 next to whoever they want for their ranked voting system. So you're not going to see these people dissuaded at all in the future. And so really their first point really doesn't apply. And in fact, they also have this chance. They do have this chance. Yeah, they do have this chance where you still have Trump elected anything more than a 3-party, or than any more than 3 people running. Let's go to their party politics. They drop some really basic warrants here that really is going to lose them this argument. They really drop the fact that Australia basically has 2 parties. So they're using Australia as this beacon that it's so great. They have ranked voting system. There's so many third parties, and then Australia basically has 2 parties. They basically have liberals and conservatives similar to the United States. And so that's really going to be losing them this entire argument when their only warrant for this is not actually true and is actually a warrant as to why this row is basically the same thing. And then their final argument, we talk about how if you get mad at the government because of the bad system, you're going to have these same partisan antagonism, and they completely drop this response, which completely takes out their third advantage.
Okay. 2 voters. Is it pretty ready? Okay. Let's start the time now. The first voter is that of solvency. Which solves better, the plan or the counterplan? Let's go through some warrants and analysis that they drop, that they bring up, that pretty much demonstrates the CP's categorically solving better. Okay. The first point is the UCLA study. We bring up Terence Tao. He actually has the highest IQ in the world. He's a professor of mathematics at UCLA. He did a study, and it was an analysis of errors and possibility theorem. He basically found that range voting has the least margin for error, and IRV, instant runoff voting, produces the most skewing in elections. There's a lot of reasons for this. One main one being the spoiler dilemma applies to both, but hugely more to IRV, and functionally does not to that of range voting. So we're probably going to be winning just off that, considering they have very little warrants on their side. Second, we bring up the Reuters study. about how the Republic of Venice for 500 years used the range voting system and produced consistently more democratic elections than its European counterparts. That's probably a pretty good study, considering it used this voting system and survived for 500 years. We probably want America to survive for another couple hundred years. We think we're going to do that with range voting, ladies and gentlemen. Third, we talk about how, again, the spoiler dilemma is functionally nullified. We bring up the example of Stephen H. Unger, the professor of computer science and mathematics at Columbia, who again studies both Arrow's theory of impossibility and he does his own proofs to demonstrate that, again, like 20 to 35% of elections under IRB are skewed in a significant manner. Like, that's pretty clear reason to vote down the app at the moment in which they don't provide a counter statistic of anywhere near that magnitude. They say, well, you bring up a lot of evidence, but not logic. We do bring up logic. We talk about how, well, this allows you to literally express your views in a much more clear and significant way than instant runoff voting ever can. You only have the capacity to rank voters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which doesn't actually tell you too much how much you prefer one over the other. In range voting, you can literally give one 99 and another one 1, and it's good. Like, this generally works way better because it provides way more free expression for voters and ultimately produces much better elections. Let's go, and then the final thing they really say on the counter plan is that, well, it's confusing. Like, judges, like, gut check this. It's probably not that confusing. You just have to apply a number. You literally just have to write a number 1 through 99 next to a candidate's name. It's probably as confusing as ranking the candidates. And if you can't do the counter plan, you probably don't have the mental faculties to do the plan. Or at least what I mean is write down like the name or like rank people. Like, if you can't do that, I don't know what to say. All right, let's go to the plan solvency, ladies and gentlemen. They first like drop this huge warrant that I bring up. Like, Australia functionally has like a two-party system. Like, independents do not have power in Australia. Like, all they say in response to this is like, they say that Congress doesn't have independence. Yes, Congress doesn't have independence. They literally have no response on the analysis that Australia has a functional two-party system with the affirmation plan. That's probably a reason to uniquely vote down the AF, right there. Second of all, we talk about how their AF plan is skewing 20 to 35% of elections, which is probably another bad thing. Again, there's so many reasons as to why the counter plan solves and the plan does not. Let's go on to impacts to marginalized groups. Let's talk about Trump. You're less likely to elect Trump in the neg world, considering you don't have that 20 to 35% skew in the neg world. Let's talk about democracy. You're probably not going to have as much of a rigid two-party system in the neg world at the moment in which you can rank candidates much more, in a way that much more expresses your views about them. So you're definitely not going to have this two-party system like rigidity, which is definitely going to help marginalized groups because we can actually elect individuals who are part of independent parties that actually represent marginalized groups. Ultimately, there's too many dropped warrants. They make the analysis that, well, warrants don't matter, but they do, and we have the logic. The plan doesn't really solve. Thank you.
Okay. I'll be going overview, observation, and then party politics. I don't know. Party politics, then Trump. Is everybody ready?
When you say overview, observation, what does that mean?
It's just like overview to the round, and then an observation on a specific argument that was made.
So just like an overview?
Yeah.
Okay.
Time starts now. Trump is the most important impact in today's debate, not only because of their impact to marginalized groups, but also because there's two extinction scenarios there, specifically the climate change and nuclear war, which means that whichever side solves better for Trump wins the debate. And it's going to be clearly the affirmation when we have more articulated analysis in the United States rather than citing archaic studies or studies that literally don't have any implication in the real world. We always think that the analysis that we're presenting is going to be more specific. But on this observation, they come up here with this like really interesting example about Bernie Sanders, Hillary, and Trump, and we're really happy they do. If you like Bernie and if you like Hillary, you don't have to vote for Trump. I don't know why they think that like it's a necessity to like have to put Trump as your third person in that like list. That doesn't mean like if you have a distaste for Trump, what better way to express that distaste than like not to rank him in the ranking system in the first place? Which means that that probably solves for a lot of their offense at the point where like if you like you're only
Alright,
voting
point of order. Okay. Like, the argument that you don't have to rank candidates in the first place is new. Like, the idea that you don't actually have to put Trump on your rankings is new.
Yeah, but
especially.
okay, can I respond?
Yeah,
Okay,
respond.
and then it's John's. But it's a specific articulation against the example that you used in the neg block, and the P of R is the first area I can use in response to the neg block, up to your discretion.
Okay.
Also, in addition, it's just the definition of preferential voting. There's no voting system in the world that requires you to vote for every candidate. But regardless, even if you don't buy that, you're going to look to the fact that they don't respond to the argumentation that we have in their counterplan, which says they relink just as hard. They don't tell you specifically why. It's more you are going to have the spoiler effect in their world other than our world, other than citing the study that we can't even verify in round. At the point where if you're going to downgrade candidates you don't like in the world of ranked candidates, you're probably going to downgrade candidates you don't like in the world of ranged voting. That's a pretty logical argument here, and there's no reason why specifically they are solving for that better. But moreover, you're going to look to the fact that they are actually increasing antagonism. Look to the fact that Ryan comes up here, the second speaker comes up here and says, you can express your distaste for a candidate way more. I think that rhetoric already proves to the fact that you are increasing the amount of antagonism against a specific candidate because you're just expressing more distaste and increasing more partisan politics. But where you're voting is this Trump scenario. So let's weigh the empirics here, because the strength of the impact relies on the strength of the link. Their turn on the Trump scenario is that there's an election skew created by a study in the abstract. You're probably going to prefer our specific analysis about how right now the key to winning an election in 2020 is going to be that of independents in swing states, specifically Florida. You're going to look to the fact that these swing state voters probably don't want to vote for people who are what ranked voting systems, specifically at the point where we see that they want to vote for third-party candidates, but they specifically can't under the current system, which means that only the affirmations plan solves, which means at the end of the day, we are solving for the Trump scenario best, and they don't give you a specific warrant for why the skew actually happens. Now, the argument they're probably going to come up here and say is that the counterplan solves for it better, but the issue with the counterplan is they don't give you an argumentation for why the spoiler effect and why all these other effects don't apply just as hard, other than some evidence that's unverifiable. We think that at the point where there's going to be subjectivity in this round, that probably means that there's greater skew. They completely drop Jodie's argument about how their response is they'll just the ratio of dislike, but people in certain areas probably have a different perception of 1 to 99 than people in other areas. They completely drop that, and that's a very specific analysis for why there's more skew in their world. Moreover, we think that at the point where that skew actually occurs, that's going to be very problematic, because that means that there's a higher chance of Trump being voted. We think this is a double mark here. Either they standardize the voting or they don't standardize voting. If they don't standardize the voting, that means that there's a subjective opinion in terms of 1 to 99, which means that there's more of an election skew, specifically under the assumption that people don't know what 1 to 99 actually means. If there is standardized voting, you vote for the perm, because if it's standardized voting and people are just voting for who they think is best and who they think is not best, that probably means that you're just inherently ranking them, which means that at the end of the day, it's non-unique. We think at the point where we give you specific analysis about why there's going to be more of a skew in their world because of the subjectivity and perception of rankings, that probably means they lose around right there. But moreover, the affirmation specifically winning, because we tell you our political analysis and we talk about all of our specific Florida independent analysis about how our system in particular will guarantee Trump doesn't win, which means that there's more of a lack of extinction and more of a lack of this marginalized group being lost. Here's how you look at the round. We don't think that they do enough analysis for why their counterplan does not link to their disadvantages other than studies that are unverifiable. We think that the argument that the ranking system is pretty subjective means that there's probably going to be just as much of an election skew in their world. That means you look to the fact that you look to the only argumentation that's specific to Trump. Because if you have an election skew in the abstract and you have an election skew specific to Trump, that probably means you default to the affirmation, because the affirmation gives you analysis about how their specific plan will actually lead to Trump not being elected. And Trump not being elected prevents two extinction scenarios, which are going to be key. When it comes to be an essential wash on the argumentation about what is going to skew what more, you always default to the specific articulation, the specific examples about the United States. Also, last thing, we just responded to the Australia example. Australia is a three-party system. We said that in our MG. I don't know why they exploded on that. At the end of the day, we think that we're always solving better. Vote AF.
I don't know if y'all shake hands, but thanks for judging. Oh, okay. Thank you.